One moment in history that I'd like to speak about, a long moment in history, is the Soviet Union. We don't learn enough about what happened in the Soviet Union, the victims of the Soviet Union, and really what happened to the people that were executing those punishments, those deaths. Today, I am so honored to have a conversation with somebody who is well equipped to speak about that time in history. His Excellency Bishop Schneider is here to join me. Welcome to Candace.
Thank you, Candace.
So I am just thrilled to have you. And I guess a perfect place to start would just be before we get into your background. Have you heard like what I just said about Americans not knowing much about the Soviet Union? Does that strike you as odd, or did you kind of know that the West was in a little bit of a bubble?
Yes, I have this sensation. I grew up in the Soviet Union. I know I had the communist school and I passed all the indoctrination of the communist system. And my parents were also persecuted and my grandparents by the communists. And later, I was still in high school, we could emigrate from the Soviet Union to West Germany, to the Western world. And there, slowly, I discovered such elements of the Soviet dictatorship methods, even in the Western world. It means a kind of totalitarianism. So it must be a totalitarian system. So only one way of thinking. And it was imposed in my time in Soviet Union by all means of television, of radio, of newspapers, all was in the hand of only one thinking. And when you dared to decline from this line, you were suddenly declared by the system Soviet Union as an enemy. So as a dangerous person. Even they had said, maybe you are a spy of the Western world. You are making conspiracy. Even this concept of conspiracy was very much used in my time by the Soviet Union dictators to simply intimidate people and to shut them down in the public. And so I can recognize, especially now in our current time in the Western world, a growing, increasing elements of a true dictatorship, and not only dictatorship, but totalitarian system, and an intolerance. By the name of tolerance and freedom, we are now living in the Western world to be oppressed, to be declared hate speech or enemies or conspiracy people. These same concepts, the same methods were used since Lenin, Stalin, and all the time of the Soviet Union. And also a kind of sarcastic methods. I mean, in my time, Soviet Union, they proclaimed always, we are the most freedom, we have the greatest freedom in the world, Soviet Union. And full with gulags, it means camps of concentration. And in the same time, they proclaimed all the day, we are the freest country in the world. For example, when Stalin built up the most horrible gulags, where my grandfather was also imprisoned, he asked to compose a song which had to be sung in all schools, universities, and workplaces. And this song, well, it was beautiful music, but the text was saying, Soviet Union, the communism, is such a beautiful place. And I do not know another country where people can breathe so freely, full with camp of concentrations, people labeled and targeted as enemies, as conspiracy, and so on. So, therefore, we have to be aware in our day, in our Western society, and of these existing already methods of Soviet dictatorship, communist dictatorship, which already infiltrated so much our public life, political life, social life in the Western countries.
You know, when I look back on my public education and I realize that I took years and years of history and I learned nothing, and I realize that within American culture, we have almost a lack of reverence for history. We pull down old buildings, we put up new ones that are glossy, and everything is quite modern. I realize that this is intentional, that they don't want us to explore true history, to have a reverence for history, because from knowing the history, you can avoid certain traps in the future. So when I hear you describing the Soviet Union, and it sounds exactly like America today, exactly like the West today, the proclamation of freedom, we've never been more free, we don't want to be like this other country, and yet and not just me, everyone senses this squeeze. We don't actually feel more free. We've actually maybe never felt more restricted. It scares me and it makes me want to really elaborate on what happened in Russia. So, was it your grandparents that were alive when the Tsar was assassinated?
Yes, they were alive, yes.
And what happened, I guess, what happened thereafter? Like, what was that period of time like for your grandmother?
Yes, it was a period of anarchy, of simply violence mm, on the side of the government. Arbitrary violence, completely the people had no sense of to be protected. And so especially the Stalin started a systematic genocide, I would even say, in 36, 37. These were the darkest years. And he called this cynically a purge, a cleansing of the Soviet society, of enemies or potential enemies. He declared there could be a potential enemy, simply innocent people. So the potential enemies for Stalin were, and then his other Soviet dictators, priests, because it must be established a atheist society, therefore priests are the first enemies. Then in the intelligentsia, intelligent people, for example, in the Gulag, in Karlak, was a famous Gulag in Kazakhstan, where I am now living. And Solzhenitsyn wrote about Karlak also. Stalin deported there in the 30s one of the best scientists from St. Petersburg and Moscow, imprisoned there. They were too intelligent for the Soviet system. Why? Because they were thinking independently. So when you are thinking independently, you are a dangerous person for a dictator. And so it was. And the others, third category, were the people who had some wealth or some properties, because it contradicts the communist system. And so, and in these 2 years, Stalin killed more or less 20 million own people, not foreign people. And from my grandfather was a victim in this so-called cleansing purge system, simply because he was a Catholic, a believer, he was a German, and he had some wealth, some lands. And he was killed when he was a young man, young married man and father of family, 27-year-old. And my grandmother, she remained a widow with 25, with two little children, my father and his brother. And so, but when the system, communist system started after the assassination of the Tsar family and Lenin, they proclaimed that now we will bring the paradise on earth. Really, I remember these slogans in my school. Communism brought paradise on earth. And Lenin, he invented the system of so-called camps of concentration, or they were called gulags later. And now I'm living in Astana, in the capital city of Kazakhstan, and close to the capital city there was a special gulag only for women, a female gulag, which was called Camp of Concentration for the wives of the traitors of the homeland. So, simple fact that their husbands were declared enemies or conspiracy people, even if they were not enemies, not conspiracy, simply that they were declared. For this fact, the wives were arrested and put in this gulag. Not only wives, the daughters of this man, the sisters of this man, of these so-called enemies of the homeland. And now there is a very impressive museum. People can look these horrors when you observe how these poor innocent women were tortured, were humiliated. I think several times I visit this museum, I must cry. It is so touching because these are mothers, innocent. They had children, and even some were pregnant, arrested, and they gave birth in the camp of concentration. And they had nothing to give food for the children. And so in their eyes, the children were dying. And it was horrible. And therefore, I repeat, we must do all what we can with all the forces of good people of goodwill, Christians and others, to make a common alliance against the already existing dictatorship in the Western countries and the cruel methods of killing people, innocent people. First, our unborn citizens. Already they are citizens, who are yet not born, but they are living, alive. And they are killed in a horrible, systematic, cruel way in the Western society. And then also another element, the destruction of family. This started already, the communists. They took away the children from the parents to educate them in the new ideology, to brainwash them. And so even Marx and Lenin, Marx, Engels and Lenin, they wrote that this established communist system in the Soviet Union, which will be established, they predicted it in some way, but the first step will be the atheism to spread and the communist system, the economy and political. So, and then they said this will be not the end. And Engels and Marx wrote, our aim will be the last aim of communism will be to destroy completely family. And now we are seeing all is going on, the direct destruction of family, of marriage. Why the communist, the last goal will be? Because when you destroy family, then you have a real society of slaves. The family is the last bulwark against dictatorship and slavery. When you have an independent, healthy family, this is for a dictator, a dictatorial system, a danger. And so, destroying family, marriage, this is for the dictators the best method to have an entire society of slaves. And we must do all what we can not to be slaves. I mean, social and political slaves. And then, of course, maybe we will speak also of the spiritual slaves. This is the slavery of sin, to be slaves of the devil and of the sin.
You know, I had sort of an unusual journey to the Catholic faith, and I went through politics. And it's funny to realize all of these stops. I did arrive as one of the last destinations, one of the last stops. I realized exactly what you're speaking about. I went, oh, the left, because I was kind of looking at this, didn't see the big picture, which really, God versus Satan. But I would always say the left, if you really want to understand the chaos of everything that's going on, what connects it all, it actually isn't chaotic. It's methodical, and it's an attack on the family. Looking at why they're trying to pull parents away from their children. You're looking at why they're pushing these themes of transgenderism and these kids going through these procedures, which would render them unable to produce families into the future. Virtually everything, even climate change, which has become something of its own religion, they encourage these kids. They say, well, the planet's not going to be here in 10 years, so it would be selfish for you to have a family. And these kids speak about how they're going to be responsible and not have kids when they get older. So I see all of those themes. And when you revisit it, you look at what happened in Russia, and I do believe that Alexander Solzhenitsyn asks this question: what happened to these administrators of this great evil? Where did they go? They had a certain bloodlust for evil that is difficult to describe, and we don't learn about it in America. We have all of these motion pictures making us emotional about different points in history, but they skip over this glaring, obvious, and I really do believe, the Bolshevik Revolution, it was just a certain kind of evil that was unmatched throughout history. And I want to talk about the Christ element, because this is very important, because it was a war on Christians. But before we do, can you just describe some of the things that happened for people that have never heard it? And there are many people who have never heard this. What happened in the Gulag camps?
Yes. Well, the people were tortured, they were humiliated, they were stripped of their dignity, of human dignity, the fundamental human dignity. They had to work real, incredible hard work as slaves, and many died there simply out of because of these conditions, and especially in the gulags, they were forbidden any religious meetings or acts of to manifest your faith or with others. And now I tell a story of a lady, a German lady. Her name was Gertrude Detzel in Kazakhstan. She was a beautiful soul. During the persecution, when there were no priests were in prison, she went secretly to the families and was teaching the catechism to the children and youth. And this was forbidden, it was dangerous. And she was so active that the police arrested her and asked her, you must stop to teach the catechism. Otherwise, we will put you in the gulag. And she said, no, I cannot stop. I must proclaim, I must give to the children this teaching. And then she was arrested in a horrible gulag. But what she did, this was a female gulag, and in the huge dormitory where they were sleeping, the ladies, different confessions, and even some were not believing, she managed that the entire dormitory, they had every evening prayers, common prayers. And she did it. And then she was called during the night to interrogated by the Secret Service. During the day, she had to work, very hard work, like a man, exhausted. Then she prayed. Then she catechized the people there. And then during the night, she was spiritually tortured all the night by the interrogatories. And what she did, she even wanted to catechize the torturers. And then one day she was called in the night again for these interrogatories, very humiliating. And suddenly she asked the chief officer, oh, and he's the other man, do you know what day is today? 25th of April. No, today is the feast of the ascension of our Lord into heaven. What does mean this? I explained you. And she started to catechize them about Christ, his resurrection and ascension and all. And she had such a power of word that they were simply silent. They were in kind of shock. And so she catechized them. And then when they are awakened, they said, oh, this lady is too dangerous for us. And then they prefer to free her from the camp of concentration rather than that she will evangelize the others. Such a beautiful example. We had also in midst of the horrible situation, we had also God helped his servants, and even priests were able to celebrate Mass secretly, and God protected them.
Mm. It's hard to even comprehend this sort of bravery. I always think it's quite strange when people think that it's bravery to speak out on a podcast, because when you weigh it against the bravery of people who were quite literally putting their lives on the line to stand up for their faith, I just think these are stories that need to be told. Your grandmother was one of these people. You said your grandfather was killed at the age of 27, and your grandmother also took a stand for her faith, didn't she?
Yes, my grandmother, Perpetua Schneider, when my grandfather, Sebastian, was killed, 27-year-old, she had first days to hide because the police could also arrest her and take away the children. But she remained in her house, and she had a lot of holy pictures on the walls. And then came the police with guns to check the house, because she was declared also as an enemy because she was the wife of an enemy traitor of the homeland. And so these policemen came, and he saw the holy pictures and icons and gave the order to her to take away these pictures. And she said, no, I will not do this. He said, yes, you must do. We are living in an atheist society. And then the policeman went to the wall and wanted to take off the picture himself. And in this moment, my grandmother shouted on him and said, you did not put this picture on the wall, and you have not the right to take it off. And even so, she was a very timid person all her life. She never raised her voice. But in this moment, God gave her such a power, even confronting these policemen with the gun and the little children. She had no fear. And so in this moment, I think that God intervened. This moment, this policeman was like in a shock, because at that time never dared because it was the time of the terror cleansing. And the police were going and shouting to the people. In this moment, the policeman, quite of shock, and did not speak nothing, and silently left the house. And so God protected the widows and orphans, but especially those who serve Him and who have the courage to witness God.
She was willing to die for her faith.
Yes.
Which I think is something that is just so incredible. And so it leads me to the question, when you examine this time period, what is it that made them focus on Christians right away? I mean, thousands of priests killed in incredibly graphic ways. They wanted to make sure the public knew that it was not okay to be a Christian. I mean, even if you're an evil dictator, logic would say, okay, if they want to keep their objects and they want to keep their cross, I don't care as long as they get into line. What is it specifically about the faith that was something that this government understood had to be eliminated?
Yes, because the religious signs and the faith, the communist dictators, they perceived as a danger for them, an obstacle for the totalitarianism, ideological totalitarianism. So the communist system was a bit totalitarian. It must be all the same way of thinking. But when there are other people who are not atheists, who are really opposing atheism with their style of life, with professing their faith, to have religious signs, to wear a cross, or to have in their houses holy pictures, or to build and to celebrate worship and so on, it was perceived by the dictators as an obstacle for the achievement of a totalitarian, new, atheist, materialistic society.
Back to, it's St. Augustine, the city of God versus the city of man. And there is a particular, if you're trying to enslave mankind, there is a freedom that comes with knowing the Lord. And they can't have people experiencing that freedom if you want to turn them all into robots. And so when I see what happened there and this focus on Christianity, and I recognize that we're learning this in the West barely. They've completely removed the Christian story from this. You almost are not allowed to talk about things that Christians have lived through in the past, particularly Catholics, I would say, have lived through in the past. And one of the tools in which they use, it's funny that you brought up the media and the books as this Soviet propaganda and the Soviet training. One of the tools that they do use as I guess, a more modernized technique of torture is the media. The media still protects the state initiatives, and doesn't really allow Christians to speak about this. Like, there are going to be tons of Christians hearing this that really don't know much about what happened in the Soviet Union. But they are waking up to the fact, and I'm one of these people as well, that the public school system is a problem. And when you trace the history, one of the first things that they did was they got the Bible out of the classroom. Under the guise of freedom of religion, somehow the Bible was removed from the classroom. And so I want to speak more about what your days were like in school under this system, what you learned, what was the new state religion, almost, so to speak.
Yes, I remember very well. First, we had to wear signs of the communism, such a red tie or a red scarf. For example, I remember in my school, Lenin lived, Lenin is alive still, Lenin will live. It is a religious slogan. And then we had to sing a song. I did not see Lenin, but I love him. So they made this brainwashing with little children, and then we had even in the school, and then also in universities, colleges and universities, a subject to learn. It was called scientific atheism. So they said atheism is science, scientific.
Wow.
Religion all what is linked with religion, especially Catholic, it is anti-scientific. It's not science.
Wow.
It's not serious. It was a rhetorical trick to, to
Almost manipulate.
yes, manipulate and to present Christianity as something which is against reason, against science, and so on. But interesting, during the Soviet time, for the Soviets, for the communists, the greatest enemy for them was not so much the so-called Western world in the Cold War, so-called at that time, but basically the Catholic Church, and especially the Vatican. Because at that time, until Vatican II, the popes all boldly resisted communism, and even they publicly accused communism and showed the atrocities and all the lies which the communist system did. And because the communist system was built on a pillar which I called simply lie. Never lie. This was systematic lie. Distortion of evidence. And so, why? Because they felt that the Vatican, the Holy See, the Pope, is the greatest moral authority in the world. And if he opposes the lies of communism and will not collaborate with them, he is the greatest enemy, and the Catholic Church. And so, for example, I have known priests, my parents also, simple priests. They were not doing nothing politics, simply priests, visiting secretly the people, giving the sacraments, confession and so on, wedding, baptisms, in midst of the dangers. And when they were caught and arrested, they were labeled and accused with this formulation: secret agent of the Vatican. He was not an agent, but he was accused. Or activist, anti-Soviet activism. So a priest who celebrated Mass, who gave the sacraments secretly, he was accused to be an anti-Sovietic agent and a spy of the Vatican.